One evening while I was sorting through our monthly bills, an unfamiliar number on my wife's phone bill caught my eye. It was not just a one-time thing. The same number appeared multiple times at odd hours. I was a little nervous as my mind jumped to the worst possible conclusion: infidelity. Yet I was determined to remain rational and seek confirmation before letting paranoia consume me. Needing someone to talk to, I turned to my best friend, Marcus. Marcus and I had been friends since college, and he was someone I trusted. Over a bottle of bourbon, in the quiet confines of my study, I shared my suspicions with him. His face remained impassive as he listened, but there was some concern in his eyes. After I finished speaking, he sat quietly for a few moments, contemplating the situation. Then he made a suggestion that I hadn't considered. "Why not hire a private investigator?" he proposed. "If your wife isn't cheating, you'll have peace of mind. If she is, you'll know for sure." Despite the initial shock of the idea, I found myself considering it. Marcus had a point. I needed concrete evidence. I spent the next few days researching and finally hired a seasoned investigator. He was a former ATF agent. With a heavy heart, I handed over my wife's details and asked him to initiate surveillance. This was a path I never imagined I'd walk, but I needed the truth no matter how harsh it might be. 2 weeks into the investigation, I received a call from the investigator. "The number," he said, "belongs to Richard Wright." The name was unfamiliar as the number had been, but the identity that came attached to it hit me hard. Richard Wright was a prominent real estate tycoon, a household name. More importantly, he was my ex-wife's ex-boyfriend from her college days. It felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. I was back in a storm of suspicions, only now the winds had a face. In the following days, I found myself wrestling with my emotions. Betrayal and heartbreak clawed at my insides as I tried to reconcile with the fact that my wife, my partner, could deceive me in such a way. I would look at our photos, our home, the life we built, and it all felt like a beautifully crafted lie. The woman I thought I knew was a DMN stranger. Seeing me struggle, Marcus intervened. He came over one evening. We sat in my study again, the room that had become a refuge from the world. "You need more evidence before confronting her," Marcus said. But I wanted to protest, to let out the anger that was festering inside me, but I knew he was right. An accusation based on a phone number and a hunch wouldn't hold up. I needed indisputable proof. Thus, I decided to continue the investigation, all the while hoping against hope that my worst fears would not be confirmed. Fast forward a few weeks, the investigator began to reveal more disturbing information. There were secret rendezvous at upscale restaurants and hotels, extravagant gifts, trips out of town, and a web of deceitful stories that my wife used to cover her tracks. Each revelation was like a dagger to my heart, piercing deeper into the life I once thought was picture perfect. The image of the woman I married and the character unfolding in the investigator's report seemed like two different people. I couldn't help but wonder how I missed the signs, or if I had been willfully blind to them. The knowledge of my wife's affair forced me to question every aspect of my relationship. I spent hours replaying our conversations, revisiting our memories, trying to find some indication of her discontent or dishonesty. I scrutinized every moment we shared, our smiles, our arguments, everything. Each memory was now tainted by the reality of her betrayal. I looked around at our home and just shook my head. Armed with enough evidence, I decided it was time for a confrontation. But I didn't want my first battle to be with my wife. I needed to face the man who was stealing my life from me. I chose to confront the real estate tycoon first. I arranged for a meeting at a local cafe, pretending to be a real estate investor myself, in a public setting where any potential confrontation could be controlled. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for him to arrive, a mix of anxiety and anger. Mr. Wright arrived, every bit as charismatic and confident as the media portrayed him. The moment he sat down, I wasted no time. I laid out the evidence before him, watching as his smirk slowly faded, but his confession when it came was as smug as a man himself. He nonchalantly admitted to the affair, exhibiting no remorse for his actions. Instead, he had the audacity to suggest that I step aside to give him and my wife the freedom to continue their affair without interference. His words lit a fire of rage within me, infuriated beyond measure. I found myself rising from my seat, leaning over the table towards him, pointing my finger in his face. "Stay the FCK away from my wife," I warned him. "This ends now." With that, I left the cafe, leaving a stunned Mr. Wright behind. The confrontation was just a beginning. The battle for my life was far from over. After the confrontation with Richard, I knew what had to be done next: confront my wife. The mere thought of it drained me, but I knew that I couldn't put it off any longer. I prepared myself for the hardest conversation of my life. Returning home, I found her in the living room, obliviously engrossed in a book. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and asked her to put the book down. The gravity in my voice must have alarmed her, because she immediately put the book aside and looked at me with a puzzled expression. As I began to lay out the evidence of her infidelity, I saw the expression of her face like, "How did I find out?" There was no defiance, no denial, just a look of fear and guilt. By the time I was done, she was in tears. She broke down, confessing to the affair and spilling out details I never wanted to hear. It was a terrible confession, punctuated by pleas for forgiveness and promises of change. The room filled with the heavy silence after her confession, as we both sat, lost in our own sea of emotion. After a long while, I finally found my voice. I need time. I need time to think about our relationship and what comes next. I left her there crying in the living room and retreated to my study. It was a long night filled with a lot of thought and very little sleep. I knew I had some tough decisions to make, decisions that would determine the course of my life. Over the next few days, I kept my distance from my wife. She tried to do things for me overly attentive. I finally told her to stop. I knew what she was doing. My wife had an online business mostly around makeup and fashion. She did well for herself. She didn't need my money. Well, the next day on my lunch break, I decided to go talk to a divorce attorney. But on my way there, I got a text from the investigator that my wife and Richard were having lunch at a nearby cafe. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke, but that text was followed by a picture. This woman literally a few days ago poured her heart out to me. When I found my divorce attorney, I went ahead and filed for divorce based on infidelity. I also told the attorney to go after everything I could get. After meeting with the attorney, I went home, told my boss I needed the rest of the day off, and then told him I will probably need more days off. He asked me what was wrong. I told him I recently found out that my wife was cheating on me and I needed to get a handle on it. He tells me take as much time as you need, but he also told me be wise in your decisions. I don't want to see you on the news. I thanked my boss and finished packing some things, and I left to go stay in the next city at a hotel. I didn't want to stay with Marcus. I wanted to be by myself. Over the next few days, I opened up a new bank account, moved some money over to it, closed a few credit cards that had her on them. Then I looked over some other financial documents, remembering she was on my life insurance policy. I changed the insurance policy, making my sister the beneficiary. I have been gone for 3 days and I haven't heard from my wife. I stayed at the hotel for about a week before going to my sister's. She is really surprised this has all gone down. Well, fast forward 3 more weeks and my wife is served with the divorce papers, and when she got them she sent me a text saying, "Good luck." I didn't respond to it. Well, at the divorce hearing, she must spend a little money on me, paying me $1,800 a month in alimony for 6 years. We were married for 13 years. We have to split the equity in the house when we sell it, and we each keep our cars. Next, I took all the information that my investigator compiled for me and sent everything to Richard's wife. About 4 months later, we sold the house and split the equity. Richard, the so-called real estate tycoon, was also getting a divorce, and his wife took 4 of his homes and $13,000 a month in alimony for 8 years. I thought to myself, DMN. That's a lot of money for a piece of ass. Anyway, I am still at my sister's. It's been a minute since all this went down. I am now in the process of buying another house. I can easily afford it now.